talking of scandals, the scandals keep on coming for Labour as the Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, has now landed himself in hot water over cash for access allegations. So, businesses were invited to the Ivy restaurant in Manchester for the chance to have breakfast with the Business Secretary for £30,000. Reports suggest that attendees could also have a photo with Mr Reynolds for 15 grand, whilst they could choose who attended the meeting for 30k. It's an expensive breakfast, isn't it really? But not quite as much as the £32,000 worth of clothes Starmer received from Lord Ali, who was granted a Downing Street pass by the Prime Minister. First, we had passes for glasses. Now it's cash for croissants. How many more scandals can we expect Labour to be involved in? The Energy Secretary, though, Ed Miliband, has wheeled himself out to defend the business sec, saying that he knew nothing about the breakfast. And Labour officials have clarified that the event is no longer going ahead. But despite this being cancelled, should Jonathan Reynolds resign over this cash for croissants scheme? Joined now by former political advisor Pablo O'Hana and former Tory MP Neil Parish. Chaps, thank you very much. Great to have you both on the show. Neil, I will start with you. Is this the kind of thing that you would expect a minister to resign over?
Yes, Patrick, I think it's an interesting one because at the moment, as Ed Miliband sort of spent all morning, didn't he, saying that Jonathan Reynolds knew nothing about it and, you know, almost as though this Labour Party official was doing something off his own bat. And I think that's the problem he's got. I think he's going to have very great difficulty distancing himself from it. And I think, you know, I don't want to be, politics is not perfect and we're all sinners at the end of the day. But I think, cash for access is always a dangerous one. And I also think you've got to remember that Labour came in on a great promise to clean up politics and all this sort of thing was never going to happen again. And yet they seem to be sort of embroiled more and more in this type of thing. So my view is that if Jonathan Reynolds knew this was happening, knew the meeting was going to take place, had actually sanctioned it, then I think he should look to resign. That's my view.
Okay.
If he can distance himself from it, then he may get away with it. But
I'll come back to you. Pablo, look, the old cash for croissants thing. I mean, £30,000 to, glean the business expertise out of a bloke who's never worked in business. I mean, you could argue that you'd have to be stupid to pay that to begin with. But, this is a bit rum, and Labour have now stopped the event, which implies that it was wrong and it was cash for access and someone should go for it.
Yeah, as far as I can tell, Reynolds wasn't actually aware of the event or offer, but I do think it speaks to a wider problem, which is, as you say, this sort of cash for access to senior politicians, which happens in all parties, to be frank. We've seen it with both the Labours and Tories. And I think if we have a problem with it, what we actually need to do is tighten regulation and rules around that so everybody follows the same rule. At the moment, we sort of have this, you kind of have to trust them when they get in there, and trust in politicians is already very low. So I think ultimately we should be aiming for a political system that operates fairly, and there is not this perception that money can buy influence. And I think that's where reform and closing the loophole comes in, rather than sort of isolating a single issue and then using that to attack for political purposes. I mean,
Neil, how likely do you think it is that the business secretary didn't know that he was signed up to go and meet a load of business leaders at the Ivy restaurant in Manchester?
Well, it's dark at the moment, Patrick, and I haven't seen the pig fly by the window. But seriously, I think it's more likely that Jonathan Reynolds knew exactly what was going on, because you can't really organise a meeting with lots of senior business people paying 15 to 30,000 to be there if you couldn't get your minister there. So surely, for goodness sake, he must have been at least contacted as to his availability. So I think the whole thing is wrong, and I think I don't agree with Paolo that you just got to tighten the rules. I think, yes, perhaps tighten the rules, but you've got to behave properly. And, don't forget Keir Starmer and everybody, quite rightly, when Boris overstepped the market and others, absolutely came down on him like a ton of bricks. But don't forget that everything was going to be different under Labour. Well, so far, I think it's worse, not
this
better.
is it. So, Pablo, let's transport ourselves back into an alternative universe where the Conservatives are still in power and this story hits the headlines. Guarantee you, Keir Starmer's at the dispatch box in the House of Commons, waving around something like this, saying, "Go, man, you've got to go." But it's different for Labour, is it?
I mean, I do agree with you that this doesn't pass the sniff test, and if I was working for them, I'd be really frustrated that this was happening. And I do think that there is this extra problem, as you say, which is that they came in on this promise of restoring public trust and restoring service to government, and that is absolutely what they should be doing. And the fact that all of this is happening makes that sort of twice as worse, really. And I do think that I mean, I think either way, if this was Tories or Labour, you get it in both parties. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that Tory MPs were selling access for policies and leaking documents and things. So I think you get it across parties, and I think this is why we need to tighten those regulations. Yes, we should be able to trust politicians, but
Patrick,
otherwise.
sorry to interrupt, but Patrick, I mean that was wrong for the Tories to do it, but equally it is wrong for Labour to do it. Also, it's no good for the Prime Minister to stand up and say, he took, he had clothes and all these things, and it's all within the rules. When you've actually taken £40,000 for clothes, and you've cut the pensioners by £300 for their winter fuel payments. You see, it's not whether it's within the rules; it's how it looks on a front page of a paper or on the GB News or wherever it may, BBC, anywhere else. And that is what the Labour Party don't seem to be learning at the moment. It's not about the rules, it's about how it looks. And I didn't expect Labour, I can be perfectly blunt with you, I expected them to be a lot better than this. I can't understand why they've got themselves into so much trouble so quickly.
Well, let's have a look at Jonathan Reynolds' track record so far, Pablo. This man stands accused, which no doubt he denies, but he stands accused of taking a free ticket to Glastonbury from YouTube shortly before Labour were about to increase the taxation on online companies. The day after Glastonbury, that proposed tax appears to have been dropped. And now here he is, with his face plastered all over, Labour literature. Come on, give us your money, give us your money. You can pay money to come and meet and have breakfast with this guy. I believe, and this is according to other reports, that Labour said that if you paid a certain amount of money, they would vet who your business was. But then, according to The Sun, if you paid a bit more money, then they wouldn't vet your business. That is straightforward cash for access. And the only reason that I can gather that anyone in their right minds would want to pay that amount of money to meet this particular business secretary is if they wanted to try to lean on him for something and they felt he was gettable. And Labour have done an advert there which makes it look like he very much is gettable. Surely he's got to go.
Well, I think there's two sides here. If I was working on this, frankly, the most important thing is how it comes across. And so if I was working with Labour right now, I'd be like, this looks terrible. Regardless of what has or hasn't happened, it looks terrible. The public are right to be upset about it, and the debate is a totally valid one. What actually happened, I suppose we'll never know. We can take Labour's word for it, or we can accuse them of lying, or whatever it is. But it is true that it just looks bad, and it looks twice as bad given the promises that they made during the election. I mean, in this case, as I say, it looks as though Reynolds didn't personally know. I agree that is perhaps a bit of a stretch, but if he didn't know, then I don't see why he should have to resign. I do think if they want to get away from these scandals, they do need to fix regulations, and they could do that, and people would look at that and think, okay, actually, they feel like they're making progress on this. They're going to fix the rules, tighten the regulations, and this won't happen. And then, we can accept a few problems, but we'll get over it.
I will stress again exactly what Ed Miliband and the Labour Party have said, which is that, this was a bit of an error, really. The event's now not going ahead. That Jonathan Reynolds himself was not personally aware of it. Of course, we can have a discussion, as indeed we have, about how likely we think that is and whether or not that is indeed the truth. But that is their story, and they are sticking to it. So, look, thank you very, very much, both of you. Great to have you both on the show, and I hope you have a great weekend. Still to come, as the Prime Minister today vows not